The anime starts with a crazy perv saying he'll only go out with this chick if she pays for their outing. He says that if she's not going to make a Pix transfer, he's open to another form of payment. If you catch my drift. As soon as she hears this, the chick tries to land a kick right to his face, but the dude blocks the kick and throws her to the ground like she's nothing. He starts cursing at her, saying he's not going out with a girl who doesn't have money and can't give him anything. The dude turns his back on her, and she starts cursing him out in every way possible. While her friends are mocking her, she says she deserved to be comforted because he was her first boyfriend. When one of her friends says she had already warned her not to get involved with that guy, she says he seemed like the kind of guy she likes. As soon as the girls start mocking her, she freaks out, saying she loves guys like Ken Takakura. They tell her it's better for her to give up, that guys like that are extinct from this world. After being upset for the rest of the class, she starts wondering if she'll ever meet a real man. She says she just wanted someone to cheer her up, and she asks why the world is so cruel. When the jerks are about to throw a magnet at the nerd's head, they notice that chick sitting with him. While they tremble in fear of this girl, she takes a look at his book and says it's beyond pathetic. She leaves, abandoning him, saying this world is just full of scumbags. She says she's tired of the boredom and that she just wants someone to vent to. Then that nerd says she's in love. She asks if he's lost his mind, and he says there's no other reason for a girl like her to talk to him. The girl says he's nuts and that she's not trying to be his friend. Suddenly, he interrupts her and says that the President of the United States has already visited Mars. When he asks if she's into that sort of thing, she says she doesn't believe in this alien stuff. He says it's not just UFOs, it's an unidentified phenomenon. She tells him he's starting to annoy her, but he keeps going on about how they've admitted that UFOs are real. He says this news is so serious that even Japan is going to get involved in this space war. The girl tries to ignore him, but he keeps following her, explaining more events. She tells him to shut up and says she's out of patience because she just got dumped, and that his nerdy attitude is so irritating, which is why he doesn't have any friends. After breaking the guy's heart, she turns her back on him and tells him to pretend he never met her. She realizes she went a bit too far and apologizes for speaking to him that way. When she decides to give him the magazine, she says that even though she doesn't believe in aliens, she still believes in ghosts. He starts laughing at her, saying it's obvious that ghosts don't exist. She gets pissed off at him and asks how he had the nerve to say that right after she confided in him. Turns out the nerd wasn't as dumb as he seemed. As they start arguing, she says her grandmother was a medium. She says her grandma not only exorcised ghosts but also dealt with lots of possessed people writhing around. The nerd says that sounds more like someone needing medical help and that it doesn't prove the existence of ghosts. The girl gets furious with him and asks if he's ever seen a UFO in his life. He says it's a leap in logic and asks if she's stupid. While they continue arguing, a heavily made-up girl appears and says it looks like her friend is into nerds now. After the argument, she ends up proposing a bet to prove that ghosts exist, but in return, he'd have to become her slave. He says he'll prove to her once and for all that ETs exist, and after that, she'll become his assistant. When night falls, she finds herself in a completely creepy hospital. She says this place is so spooky and asks how a place like this could be an alien base. While walking through the hospital, he says that if she goes up to the roof of this hospital and calls for a UFO, she'll end up getting abducted. She asks what he's trying to say, and the nerd says she'll end up being kidnapped and turned into an experiment for these aliens. The girl asks how he knows this and if he's ever been abducted before. He says it's not impossible, considering most abducted people have their memories erased. She asks if he's ever seen a UFO, and he says whether he has or not isn't the most important thing to talk about. She asks how his experience has been, and the guy says he's already reached a spiritual level. He starts freaking out and says he'll prove once and for all that ghosts don't really exist. The girl asks if he's scared and says just so he knows, people always say ghosts appear in this place. Suddenly, he starts hearing a strange noise and begins chanting 5 hymns from the harp to try and ward off the negative energy. When the girl says shouting in this place is the most dangerous thing to do, he starts freaking out even more. He asks her if she's really seen a ghost, but when she says no, he starts wondering how she could be so sure if she's never seen one. She mocks him, and he starts yelling on the phone that it's absurd for her to believe in something she's never seen. She says it's not absurd when you have a grandmother who deals with spirits. And since she grew up without her parents, she trusted her grandmother's words a lot. The nerd says he's sorry for her loss, and she asks why he suddenly got all soft like that. Then she starts explaining that her family is beyond bizarre. Every time she left the house, she was forced to do a ritual before going out. And since she had to do it all the way to school, the boys always made fun of her for having to perform that ritual. She says that if she didn't do it, her grandmother would get very angry with her, but the worst part of the story is that the boy she liked also made fun of her. At that moment, she felt so much hatred towards her grandmother that she even said some harsh things to her. After that, she spent years without talking to her and never did it again to avoid being humiliated. What she hated most wasn't the fact that the boy she liked teased her, but seeing people mocking her family. Suddenly, her grandmother appears, and she says she always loved her and respected her work, which seemed special. And above all, she acknowledged that her grandmother had taken care of her when she was alone. After telling a touching story explaining why she believes in ghosts, She asks him why he believes in aliens. He says it's not that important, and he doesn't have a specific reason to believe in those things. The girl says it seems like he's more outgoing when talking on the phone. When he says it's easier to talk on the phone, he suddenly notices a trail of bloody footprints. Suddenly, when he looks back, an old hag says she'll let him enjoy her body if he lets her take his banana. The nerd starts running like the Flash, and the girl tells him he can't run in that place. While he's panicking, he tries to convince himself that ghosts don't exist and that it's just an old perv. But what he didn't know is that if the old hag caught up with him, he'd be cursed right away. As soon as the hag goes after him, he starts screaming like a lunatic, and the girl freaks out trying to help him. When she starts running towards him, the lights begin flickering, and 3 aliens appear in front of her. She even tries to escape from them, but unfortunately, the creeps manage to grab her. Suddenly, she opens her eyes and finds herself in the weird situation that these blockheads put her in. They say they're from the planet Serpo and that she doesn't need to be afraid of friendly aliens like them. She says friendly people wouldn't leave her in this state and asks where her clothes are. The blockhead alien tells her to relax and that they took perfect care of her belongings. She orders these idiots to let her go and tells them to get her stuff back. The alien says that since his race consists only of males, they can only reproduce using clones. Another blockhead says that since identical units can't reproduce, they needed to copy the bananas of humans. The girl doesn't understand anything, and they say that after mating with her, her body will serve as an experiment for them. She starts freaking out and says she's not losing her purity like this since she's saved herself for years for the love of her life. When the aliens stick something on her forehead, they start using some sort of telekinesis to control her brain waves. As she starts writhing, the pervy alien wonders how she's managing to resist their power. Suddenly, her phone rings, and when the big guy answers, he immediately gets kicked in the face to wake him up. That old perv comes out of the phone and uses a forbidden jutsu on that alien creep. The nerd apologizes to her and says that unfortunately, Granny Turbo had cursed him. As she asks him to help her, the blockhead alien says that the technology he used is unknown even on their planet. He says he can't control himself. Then the banana-obsessed old hag appears again, and Momo has no idea what's going on. The big guy says that humans weren't allowed in this place, and when he reveals his true identity, he says he's going to grab the nerd's banana for himself. Suddenly, an insane fight starts, and the alien says that these moves were too fast for him. The horny old lady goes after him and says she won't let any banana escape from her reach. The big guy attacks her, sending her flying, and says it's time for him to pass his banana as an experiment for them. He says he'll give everything that's needed and that his dream has always been to see real aliens. And since he never had friends, he always thought the aliens could be his friends. He starts having a flashback, saying he always called the UFOs when he was a child, but unfortunately, they never showed up for him. And while everyone made fun of him and didn't acknowledge his existence, Momo was the only one who chose to protect him. He starts getting pissed off and says he's going to take down anyone who dares touch her, and if necessary, he'd choose to become a monster just to protect her. Mina tells him to keep it up, and the horny alien immediately shoots him in the face. The big guy says they can't be friends with violent people like him, and that the only thing they needed was women instead of men. While the alien was using his hypnosis on her, she starts remembering when her grandma told her to focus all her Ki to get rid of any problem, and that she just needed to put strength in her belly and imagine the Ki flowing inside her head. But as soon as she remembered when everyone made fun of her, she said her grandma was a fake medium, and that she would never do that crap again. When the flashback ends, she starts focusing her energy and begins exploding everything around her. The nerd asks if she had superpowers, and she says she didn't even know that. While the alien starts wondering what was going on, Momo begins to recognize that her grandma was indeed a true medium. She thanks her grandma and delivers a huge kick to the alien's face. And the kick was so powerful that she sent him straight to Disney. As soon as a UFO shows up, she gets desperate looking for the nerd. And when he appears, it was that horny old lady who had taken control. When Mina focuses her energy on the old lady, something unprecedented happens. She asks why he was writhing if Turbo Grandma had already left his body. But it turns out that since she stole the boy's jabliscudo, the curse would remain active as long as she had it. The old lady says she will only return his banana if they have the courage to show up in the tunnel once again. Momo starts freaking out and asks the old lady to give back his downstairs. Suddenly, the ship starts going out of control and ends up crashing, blowing up the entire street. After finally getting out of that place, she says now she truly believes in aliens. And the nerd says that since he lost his jabliscudo, it's impossible for him not to believe in ghosts now. Mina says that if she doesn't keep using her Ki, it's certain that he'll lose control once again. And just for a change, she didn't just lose her clothes, but also her wallet and phone. When he asks how to get rid of this curse, she says the only way for that to happen is by beating the crap out of Turbo Grandma. He says he's going to deal with that expired passion fruit and tells her to put on his clothes. After saying that it was his fault, he says he can't let her get involved in this kind of thing. She says it would be better if he didn't go alone since they went through this crazy experience together. The nerd is happy to see that she cares about him, and she tells him to hurry up and put on his clothes. He says he's kind of clumsy and that she should wear these clothes instead, or he won't be able to speak properly. At that moment, her heart starts racing, and she starts wondering why it felt like he had just said one of Ken Takakura's lines. When she tries to change the subject by asking his name, he says his name is Ken Takakura. And as soon as she hears that, she can't believe he has the same name as Momo says she will not accept his story under any circumstances. And the nerd says that whether she likes it or not, that was his real name. She starts throwing a tantrum like a child and says she's going to pretend she didn't hear anything. Suddenly, the old woman begins to take over his body, and he asks Momo to use her powers so he can return to normal. The spoiled passion fruit shows up asking for a banana again, and Momo kindly throws him against the wall. When the nerd thanks her, she says that from now on, he's forbidden from using his name. She says that since he likes occult stuff so much, his name will be Okarun. And if he dares to say that name again, she'll end his life. While they're walking around the city, she starts mocking him, saying it looks like he loved the new name. Okarun ends up farting and says it's her fault for putting so much pressure on him. As the day breaks, Momo says they can relax since spirits only come out at night. When they finally get back home, the girl tells him to be careful because her grandma is very strict with boys. The nerd is already shaking, and as soon as he sets foot in the yard, his body starts catching fire. Momo wonders what's happening and uses her power to knock the nerd away. But when she looks at the monument, she sees some kind of seal to ward off unclean spirits. While the guy is all twisted up in the water, he says he thought this was the end for him. Momo tells him to try again and says she'll throw him in the river herself if he catches fire again. He starts shaking in fear, but luckily he manages to pass through just fine. The girl asks if he's feeling okay, and he says his body is tingling all over. She starts mocking him again, saying his hair is perfect for scrubbing pots. He asks if she's crazy and says he almost died from this stunt. After entering the old woman's house, Momo tells him to make himself at home since her grandma isn't there. In Momo's room, she tells him to wait outside while she changes clothes. But as soon as Okarun closes the door, that naughty old woman shows up again. The girl asks if he's gone crazy and uses her power to slam him into the wall. He tries to apologize, but she's not happy at all with his nonsense. After checking out his look, she says that even though it's a feminine outfit, it would suit the nerd well. She asks if that thing down there of his has disappeared, and he freaks out, asking what she means by that. But as soon as he realizes he opened his eyes without her permission, he starts begging for forgiveness immediately. She says he can relax, and that she only asked because the perverted old lady had mentioned it. And when he decides to check, she says she wants to see how his little bird is doing. He says he's not showing anything and asks if she's stupid or something. But she mocks him and says there's nothing there for him to be freaking out about. They start arguing, and the nerd wonders what he's going to do with his life now. Momo says she has nothing to do with it, and he says it was her who came up with this whole bet thing. She says she was never interested in his stories and that he kept talking to her. Okarun says he only did it because he didn't want to lose the only chance of his life. He says his dream has always been to have a friend, and when he saw that opportunity, he thought it might be his only one. The nerd says she lives in a completely different world than him, and since she's someone he's not worthy of talking to, he wanted to apologize for dragging her into this. When he says she can go back to ignoring him when this is all over, she gives him a lecture, telling him he should stop judging people if he wants to make friends. She says she won't abandon him and that they should go back to talking about occult stuff. After Okarun gets emotional, she tells him to say something, at least. But the guy ends up cursing her, and she asks what he means by that. He says she should be a little more gentle, and they start arguing even more. Suddenly, they hear a noise, and Momo says she's never heard it before. Okarun is confused, and she says it could be because her grandma has 2 doorbells. The first one is for humans, and the second is for evil spirits. But then she remembers that it's all because she removed that seal. They start shaking in their boots, and she says it's better to put the talisman back just in case it's a spirit. The guy asks if she's trying to burn him too, and she says he just needs to get out of the area. The girl goes to check and says everything's fine, but when the nerd tells her to look at the sky, they see something very strange. She tells them to run, but unfortunately, a huge wall prevents them from leaving the place. When she tries to put the seal, he says she won't be able to since the gate is buried. She wonders what they'll do now and says, unfortunately, they're going to die. And as she runs her finger over the seal, she suddenly finds her nose bleeding. The nerd was also about to go play for Vasco, and she rushes over to ask if he's okay. She says it's probably that black mist that's causing this. And when she looks up, she sees a huge monster saying they were horrible people for breaking their promise. The monster even tries to hit them, but they dodge, and the giant punches the wall instead. When they realize there's nothing they can do, the crazy guys start running like Flash while the monster tries to hit them. After they get thrown far away, the little creep says it's time to steal his banana. Momo asks what the hell that was and if he happened to have another little bird. He says of course not, and that this monster must be some kind of alien. He's been seen both in Japan and the United States, and experts call him the 3-meter alien. Momo asks why that bell rang if he wasn't any kind of spirit. And the nerd says science shows that people who see spirits also tend to see aliens, and it's likely they have some kind of connection. The girl says if they don't do something, they're going to end up dead, and that she can't use her powers on other people while she's controlling his curse. But as soon as she says that, the old woman appears again, and they start running, scared out of their minds. Momo even manages to control his curse, but unfortunately, that crazy old lady's arms still hadn't come off him. Okarun starts reflecting on life a bit and tells Momo to release the curse because he's going to start throwing punches. She asks if he's sniffed flour, and he says he doesn't usually fear aliens. He asks if she can only control his mind, and just then that little creep appears in front of them. Momo says that as easy as it looks, she hasn't mastered that power yet. The nerd says if he's lucky, it's likely he'll master Grandma's power. After they come to an agreement, Okarun starts to concentrate, and while he's transforming, the monster starts attacking them again, wanting his banana. But the nerd appears with a new transformation that's completely overpowered. Momo is impressed, and he says he's overflowing with power, but at the same time he feels very depressed. She says he seems pretty bipolar, but the nerd says that even though his mind is okay, his feelings are still pretty down. After she mocks him, he says that unfortunately he's a strange guy. She says she already told him to stop that, and he says a guy like him should have died long ago. While he distracts himself looking back, the monster slaps him. When they think he's dead, he appears next to the alien and says that the power of that old lady is really unfair. Momo says it was so fast that even she couldn't keep up. Suddenly the guys start staring each other down, but out of nowhere, Okarun starts spitting ketchup. As soon as Momo realizes the nerd is about to get dragged up, she uses her power and blasts him away. She asks what happened, and he says there's no way he can control that power while his body feels like it's going to explode. He says it's definitely not a speed meant for humans. He wonders how they're going to manage to defeat that ugly thing. The girl tells him to shut up and says that if she knew, they would have already defeated it. But then she analyzes him and realizes he looks a lot like a sumo wrestler, and if they could make him touch his hands to the ground, it's likely they could win. Momo tells him to aim for his feet while she tries to take him down. They start heading toward the monster, and while the nerd is feeling down, the monster is screaming like crazy for a banana. Okarun even manages to rip the monster's leg off, but he says it's too much power for his body. Momo says she's using both hands to control him, and suddenly she attacks him to the ground. But as soon as the big guy tries to hit him, they start celebrating, saying her plan worked. But those who celebrate too soon end up regretting it, right my friends? The monster sends her flying and gives her a big slap. When Okarun starts to lose control, Momo says he really is annoying. She tells the alien that his hand touched the ground and that this isn't fair at all. The nerd tells her to release the curse and says he doesn't care what happens to his body. She tells him to shut up while she smashes the face of that cheater. Okarun asks if she's going crazy, and she says she hates when someone cheats. The big guy gives her a punch, and the nerd starts to panic, asking her to release his curse already. Momo says it went perfectly just as she calculated, and since she was out of the gate, now she could use the seal again. She pulls the nerd close and puts the talisman back in place. The big guy starts to burn up, and that's what happens to those who try to cheat Momo. Suddenly they return to reality, and she starts celebrating, saying their plan finally worked. She says she really thought they were going to die, and when the curse appears again, she says that besides being annoying, he doesn't give her a minute of peace. When he tries to justify himself, she says that hairstyle looks really good on him, but she prefers the one when he's in Turbo Grandma mode. The nerd asks if she's making fun of him, and suddenly she starts feeling dizzy and faints, and as he tries to help her, his body starts to change, and everything around them turns red when the crazy old lady appears. Meanwhile, in a TV show, a mysterious creature starts trying to predict the life of this famous actor. But every time she tried to get something right, the boy would contradict her in front of everyone. After he embarrassed her, they even took the show off the air. The staff says that Santa Dodoria was terrible, and that it made no sense for her to think that girl already had children. When the guy asks if they are really going to put that embarrassment on the air, the other staff member says there's no problem since no one will waste time complaining about a local show like this. As soon as that fake psychic leaves the show, she takes an Uber to go home. The driver says she should be Santa Dodoria and that he had already watched some of her shows on TV. When he asks if she really has psychic powers, she ignores him and says she'll get out right here. The driver says he doesn't mean to insult her, but he wanted to see with his own eyes if she really had powers. But she tells him to get lost if he wants to go back to his own home one more time. Meanwhile, that crazy old lady was stroking Momo's body and thinking about all sorts of naughty things she could do now. But suddenly, she gets hit in the face with Thor's hammer, and that old lady says she thought her granddaughter was going to bring a bum instead of something ugly like that. She says her skin was already drying out because of the stress and that they should put an end to this nonsense already. And when you look closely, it's Momo's grandma, my friend. It seems that the grandma isn't that old after all. When that crazy old lady tries to go after her, she ends up going back to the circle, and Momo's grandma says she was indeed very fast. But since grandma is on, she had already prepared a trap for that crazy old lady, and if she dares to cross that energy barrier, she would die burned on the spot. She explains a bit more about her technique, saying that as soon as she hammers a talisman nail inside that circle, it automatically becomes a barrier. But since she hammered it from the outside, she created an external barrier for that spoiled passion fruit. She starts mocking the Turbo Grandma and says that the reason she couldn't touch her is because she was protected by a barrier. The crazy old lady says she will devour her and that she wouldn't be trapped in that circle forever. Momo's grandma says that her intention wasn't to trap her, and she quickly hits that old lady in the face. She starts whacking her and says it's better for her to stay firm if she doesn't want to be burned by that circle. After mocking her, that spoiled passion fruit says she is nothing but an old witch. But Momo's grandma says that in this grandma fight, she is the hottest among them. When she was about to finish off that chupacabra, she says that if she dies, Okarun will also die along with her. She says she will kill all the scoundrels who try to deceive her granddaughter, and she starts creating another barrier to burn that old lady into pieces. Suddenly, Momo wakes up startled and begins to wonder what happened to the nerd. When she runs to check, her grandma tells her to be quiet because she wants to watch her TV show. Momo says she wanted to talk to her, and her grandma asks if she went to a spirit point. She says that actually it was her friend, and that unfortunately he had been cursed while they were talking on the phone. Momo's grandma says that this show was incredibly good. Momo asks if she was paying attention and says that her friend is in danger when he is away from her. She says that if she is referring to that old lady, she has already dealt with her. Momo gets desperate and starts asking if he wore glasses to know if it was Okarun. Her grandma says she thought she didn't believe in ghosts since she called her a fake medium. Momo gets angry and tells that witch to stop holding grudges and clarify everything for her. But the grandma starts being dramatic, saying that she didn't need to believe her since ghosts don't exist. Momo kneels to her and apologizes, saying that she was wrong all this time, and now that she has redeemed herself, she wants to know what happened to her friend. Her grandma tells her to check the main hall, and Momo says that if something happened to Okarun, she will never forgive that old witch. She says she can't miss this opportunity just now that she found a friend who also likes the occult like her. After blaming herself to the maximum, she says that none of this would have happened if she hadn't made that stupid challenge. As soon as she opens the door desperately, Okarun was chilling, eating a rice cake. She can't believe it, and he says he was very worried that he might have accidentally killed her. But she slams the door in his face and says that old lady made her think he had died. After calling him Four Eyes, he apologizes for still being alive. While Momo feels more relieved, her grandma appears and asks since when she makes friends with monsters. Momo says she was startled, and grandma says he was just protected inside that place. And as soon as he goes outside, he will become a monster again. Momo says she is a liar for having lied to her, and grandma says she loved seeing the look of despair on her face. She even asks if this was the love of her life, but Momo tells her to stop with that nonsense. After explaining Okarun's situation, she says that he can only break the curse when Turbo Grandma returns his banana, and since she was involved in this situation, she really needed to help him. Her grandma says this is nonsense and that she was liking the nerd. Changing the subject, she tells grandma that now she could also use superpowers, and that, after facing those aliens, she suddenly learned how to use them. Grandma asks if she drank chocolate milk without shaking it and says there is no such thing as aliens. Momo says she understands her perfectly because she also thought that until she went through yesterday. She says that this doesn't matter much and that things don't get good when she doesn't control the nerd's curse. She says that even if she didn't believe in aliens, she knows that Turbo Grandma is a very problematic enemy, and that a long time ago, she was known as Grandma 100 kilometers per hour. She was a kind of demon who haunted all of Japan for hundreds of years, and when she heard that she stayed inside that tunio for several years, she decided to go there to check it out. She says that the negative energy in that place was so intense that even she couldn't enter. But all this was because of the linked spirits, which are a kind of ghost that remains in the same place forever due to a strong attachment to the place. And that besides being invincible within their territory, no medium would have the courage to face these spirits. Grandma says that all this can only indicate one thing, which is very likely that that spoiled passion fruit fused with a linked spirit. She tells Momo not to get into a fight with that old lady because she didn't want to lose her precious granddaughter. When she tells her to forget about Nerdola, Momo is confused. She tells her granddaughter to go back to living a normal life, and she wonders what her beloved Ken San would do in a situation like this. Momo says that for sure he would try to save Okarun, and in this case, she would do the same as him. Grandma starts mocking her and says she was indeed in love with that Nerdola. She even tries to justify herself, saying she was referring to the author, but her grandma was already there telling the guy that Momo was slowly confessing her feelings for him. After all this confusion, Grandma says she's going to play tag with that expired passion fruit. And since that spirit trusts her speed too much, they need to provoke her so they can resolve this in a race. But since the territory of the linked spirit is inside the city of Shono, they would have to lure that old lady away from that place. If they can make her leave, she'll end up getting weaker, and then they'll have a chance to try to defeat her. Momo says that with her legs, she has no chance of beating Grandma Turbo, and she asks if it wouldn't be easier to put those seals inside the tunnel to weaken that spirit. Grandma says that wouldn't work and that, unfortunately, she won't be able to help her at all, since the power of this barrier she uses is borrowed from a god who lives in this city. And if she leaves, she won't be able to use the power of those seals outside the city. Momo says she didn't know they also have their own territory, and Grandma says that every part of the land has its own god. And if she really wants to defeat that old lady crazy for bananas, it's best she starts training from now on. Momo says that even if she tries her hardest, she wouldn't have a chance to compete in an athletics tournament, so imagine against that old lady who is faster than Sonic. Grandma says she was actually talking about the nerd, and he asks if he will finally get to participate in their conversation. Momo says that Okarun's resistance was very low, and that's why she needed to control his curse all the time. Grandma says that in that case, he just needs to run with her granddaughter on his back. And when Nerdola asks how much Momo weighs, she says that's not a question you should ask a girl. Okarun says he can only run at full speed while he's cursed. She says it's time to stop being a couch potato and start doing 5 sets of push-ups, and then 500 squats and 500 sit-ups right now. And since she won't be able to help them with this, the two will have to evolve their skills. She says that starting tomorrow she'll be their sensei, and as for the nerd, he could start training today. Okarun says her grandma is in great shape, and Momo tells him to shut up. After a pretty awkward moment between them, the four-eyed guy says that when they were facing that alien, he only thought about himself. Momo says she knows he had no choice, and he says that unlike him, she took down that monster. And if another strange creature shows up, he'll face his own fear just to be able to save her. He asks her not to lose faith in him and that he doesn't want to lose this friendship. She says he's overthinking things, and he asks why she slammed the door in his face like he was an animal. Momo gets flustered trying to explain, and he says he was right all along. She says she already told him no, and now he's really managing to be a nuisance in her life. Momo says that when he was fighting he seemed really cool, but the way he is now, she'd probably have to save him again. After leaving Okarun speechless, she says she's going to get some blankets for him to sleep. When he gathers the courage to say something to her, he ends up giving up and just says he wanted to ask for a little water. Meanwhile, Momo's grandma starts seeing a news story revealing the true identity of that author who was on her show. After seeing that this news spread across almost all channels, Momo wonders who even cares about this. The next day, Nerdola starts to panic, saying he needs to take a huge dump. Grandma says he just needs to go, but Momo says if there's any obstacle blocking her view, his curse will be activated again. She says there's no other option but to see him poop, and she refuses to witness that scene. Nerdola says it's not that simple and that it's like stepping on his dignity. Momo asks if she doesn't have a plan, and Grandma asks how she was controlling his curse. She says it's like she sees an aura around him, and whenever she squeezes it, it starts to shrink, and that everything around her has an aura of a different color, that she can control everything but has a limit to it. Grandma says she always thought these powers were stronger than that. Momo says that when she awakened her powers, it was like she could turn any imagination into reality. But unfortunately, that had faded away, and now she can only capture auras. She says the problem is that she was relying too much on her sight and that she needed to learn to use all her senses. When Momo closes her eyes, she says it's very cold. After seeing that this wasn't going to work, Nerdola says he's about to poop his pants. Grandma says she needs to do something, and the guy says he doesn't want anyone to see him taking a dump. When he tries to go to the bathroom, Momo asks if he's going crazy wanting to poop in her house. He tells her to stop being stupid, and they start arguing like two kids. Grandma says he wasn't a bad boy, and that she wouldn't let him ruin her bathroom. After sitting on the throne, he says this is too humiliating for him, but Momo says she should be the one saying that. Nerdola says he always wanted to experience being abducted by aliens, but this was too much for him. Momo's grandma says that even though Momo has transformed, it's likely that her ability is sealed. She says that sounds pretty cool, but Grandma says she needs to train hard to try to unlock her full power. And since she's sure the four-eyed guy is going to take a while to develop his muscles, that responsibility will fall on Momo. When Momo looks back at Nerdola, she suddenly comes face to face with that crazy old lady. She even tries to ask her grandma for help, but she's standing there with a bleeding nose. She asks what she did to her grandma, and the crazy old lady says she'll let her choose whether she wants to die of a heart attack or a stroke. She says her curse can kill anyone that this brat sees at least once. And if she doesn't go to the tunnel tonight, she'll curse everyone through this nerd. After Turbo Grandma shuts the door, Momo starts to wonder why her grandma's ear is bleeding. And when they look at the seal, they end up facing that. When night falls, Grandma tells them to wear those clothes if they want to be safe. Momo says they're not weak and that they've faced aliens before. Grandma tells her to stop being foolish and that there's no such thing as aliens. And if she had listened to her advice since she was little, she wouldn't be causing so much headache for her. When Momo turns her back to her, Grandma says she'll keep praying for her to come back alive. As soon as they leave the city, Okarun says this is too embarrassing for him. But Momo says if it weren't for that, they'd end up exhausted if they went by bike. When she says she's going to deal with Turbo Grandma, Okarun thanks her for being so worried about him. But Momo says she wouldn't forgive that damn old lady for trying to hurt her grandma.